So first, it's great to be here with everyone. Thank you to everyone for joining us. My name is Tim Wheeler. Um, I moved to Long Island about a year and a half ago. Before that, I had never been here before. And I just want to say for anyone who doesn't know the Rewild team yet, um, they have all been very gracious and generous with me as I've kind of become part of this community out here on Long Island. And I would certainly suggest that you contact your local chapter if you're not in touch with them already and volunteer. Um, and yeah, join the movement out here on Long Island. So I am going to present on climate resiliency and gardening. My background is ecology and biology. I have a master's in environmental management and biodiversity. Um, that's to me a bit different from climate resiliency. Um, so as I was preparing for tonight, I thought that I would just do a presentation that kind of hit some highlights in climate resiliency, and I could prime the conversation with a bit of background information and some suggestions. And then I would love to have a conversation with everybody um, after I talk for a few minutes here about how climate change is impacting you in your garden, and if you have tried anything that has worked, if you've tried anything that hasn't worked. Um, I think that it's great to talk to people and learn from others' experiences. So that's what I'm hoping we can do at the end here. Okay. So I live in East Hampton, and I work for a small nonprofit called Perfect Earth Project that was founded about 13 years ago by a landscape designer. Her name is Edwina von Gall, and she has been in the business for a very long time, about 40 or 50 years, and her designs evolved. She started out very conventional, tightly clipped hedges and reliant on chemical inputs. And she grew as her art grew, and she started this nonprofit because she saw that there was missing knowledge, missing information in the industry. And she thought it's so simple. If people knew the negative impacts, environmental impacts that conventional landscaping has, they'll want to switch right away. And as she started talking to people, she realized that it's a bit more complicated than that. People aren't so willing to give up their neon green lawn that glows in the dark, and they're not willing to give up the shapes that they recognize, like the square hedge or the round boxwood or whatever it is. Um, and there's also been a lot of pushback from the landscaping industry because we're talking about people's livelihoods, and if they have a business model that's working, they're not really inclined to change just because we come along and we say, um, you know, you could be doing something better for the planet. Um, so, like I said, I moved out here about a year and a half ago for this position. I'm the Living Lands Regional Manager for Long Island. And the Living Lands program offers free 1 hour site visits to any homeowner who wants me to come by. And I talk about landscaping practices and how homeowners can switch from conventional landscaping to nature-based land care that focuses on reducing toxic inputs like chemical fertilizers, um, avoiding the use of pesticides, not spraying for ticks on your property, um, how to use native plants, which native plants you should use, how to manage biomass like leaves, grass clippings, twigs and branches. And if you take a tree down, how about you don't chip it all up? What if you try to keep it on your property? So I have this map here on the slide that everyone can see. We started offering these free visits last May, I think, in 2024. And this map is from maybe April of this year. And I think that I've done about 80 visits. We offer the visits from Southampton out to Montauk, just on the South Fork at the moment. And so that's why they're all clustered there on the South Fork. And it's been really interesting doing this work because I get to talk with homeowners all the time who are all across the spectrum of conventional landscaping, all the way down to, they've never put a single chemical on their property. They have only native plants and they totally know what they're doing. And that's been really, really interesting for me. And yeah, if anyone's on the South Fork and interested in having me come by, feel free to shoot me an email and we can set up a visit sometime. So when we talk about climate resiliency, I'm going to set the stage just a little bit. So what we're really talking about is dealing with increased variability in weather. And this can manifest as higher average temperatures, which I'm sure we have all noticed, extended periods of cold, drier summers, periods of heavier rain, increased storm intensity. That's just some things that we might come up against. And it's really about the weather and the impacts that this varied weather has on our plants. And when we compare against historical weather patterns, we're seeing big differences, as I'm sure everybody on this call knows. So what do we see when we're out in the garden, when we're dealing with this varied weather? We see stressed plants and stressed people. And I'm going to extend this just a little bit outside of the garden. We'll see stressed plants everywhere because they don't have to just be, your prized possession plant to be out experiencing the weather that we have. A few years ago, I was working up in the Catskills and managing a 700-acre forest on the side of a mountain, and there were about 150 acres of hemlocks there. And I don't know if everyone on the call knows much about hemlocks, but they're quite threatened at the moment by a few different things. But notably on this property, there was the hemlock woolly adelgid, and I was working with a tree specialist who had been in the Catskills for many years, and he was saying that if we had cold winters, really cold winters in the Catskills, like they used to, he thinks that the damage from the woolly adelgid would be not quite so bad. So there are all kinds of ways that plants get stressed, and it makes them susceptible to pests and disease. And they won't have enough water. They can be stressed by the heat, by the sun, and that all leads to stressed people. And one thing that I'm constantly trying to do in my work with Perfect Earth Project is to bring some joy back into gardening. I find, especially out here in East Hampton, a lot of people are um, quite stressed. There's no joy in their landscapes and in their gardens. It's always, something's out of place, something's not done right, something's not pruned correctly or tightly enough. Um, and so we want to bring joy back into gardening and try to reduce stress. So I'm just going to go through a few things to think about as you're trying to be resilient in your garden. Having healthy soil is the best way to have healthy plants. So you can leave organic matter on the soil to decompose. Um, Roots growing in the soil is beneficial to healthy, stable soils. Live foliage close to the ground and leaf litter on the soil retains moisture in the soil. A lot of people put down wood mulch, and I'm always trying to tell them you could use native ground cover plants instead and have what we call a soft landing or a green mulch. Um, and that's great for climate resiliency as well to keep moisture in the soil. Um, Healthy soils become more porous over time and can accept greater amounts of water than unhealthy soils. And this goes back to increased rain in a storm. So your soils, if they're depleted and unhealthy, the rain is either going to run off of them or take the soil with them, take the soil with the rain as it runs off down into our waterways. And also, you want to avoid soil disturbance that can change the structure of the soil. So maybe you've heard of no dig farming or gardening. That's a way to keep the soil structure intact because every time you cut into the soil, you're breaking um, bonds between the soil molecules. And there's a structure, a healthy structure there that allows air and moisture or water to flow through the soil. But if we have heavily compacted or disturbed soils, then it's harder for plants. It's not as able to retain water and moisture, and it can be pretty bad. Oops. Plant selection, of course, is something very important. So we want climate adapted plants. We want plants that are happy where we plant them, and that usually means native plants. Now, there's much discussion about what native means, and just going back to the hemlocks that I was talking about in the Catskills, if you go back 12,000 years or 15,000 years to the end of the last ice age, there were not hemlocks in the Catskills. They would have been much further south because that's what the climate allowed for. So plants can move around. It takes time, of course, they're slow. Um, and we're experiencing a changing climate now that means that plants are also going to be able to move around. And we'll have some plants that wouldn't have survived before in our area, and some plants that would have survived that can't survive anymore. So we want to go for the ones that can survive. I always talk about adjust the plant, not the soil. Many people are constantly trying to add things to their soil, change their soil. They say, I have horrible soil. There's no such thing as horrible soil. You have great soil. You just have to find the right plants. It's much easier to change a plant than it is to change the soil. Um, Perennial plants are better often because they'll have deeper roots. And deeper roots mean that they're more resistant to drought and heat, and go for a diversity of species. So if you have one kind of plant, um, and for some reason, some year, it's a really bad year for that plant, it's going to look really dramatic when all of that one plant, and it's the only one you have, all dies or gets sick or, has some disease problem. Um, so go for a diversity. The more diversity you have, the more resilient you can be. And then proper irrigation. Um, People are constantly irrigating incorrectly. And that's just because their system, comes with a preset 15 to 20 minutes every other day. That's an easy thing to put in your system, but it's really not the best for the plant health. That means that water is staying shallowly at the surface of the soil, and we want water that goes down so that the roots go down because the surface of the soil is what dries out first. So we say seldom and deep to send roots down into the soil. And generally, that means that if you're going to irrigate, you should irrigate for long enough so that the water goes down 6 to 8 inches into your soil. And another water related suggestion is to collect rainwater for reuse. Um, and then compost with care. Um, Perhaps people on this call know about composting. Anaerobic composting releases methane, which is a greenhouse gas. Anaerobic means that it's composting in the absence of oxygen. So turning your compost can aerate the compost um, and make it aerobic decomposition. which will not release methane. Methane is a very bad greenhouse gas. I think that it is 4 times as bad as carbon dioxide, I believe. And for anyone who doesn't know, proper composting involves the simple ratio of 3 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. Carbon is things brown, things like leaves, woody material, and nitrogen is green, like grass clippings and kitchen scraps. And this is something that I included. I really don't know too much about, but just including for anyone who might live in an area that's prone to fires, because back in March, perhaps some of you live near where the fires were happening in Hampton Bays, or I forget where exactly, Patchogue maybe. Um, but keep brush away from your house, things that can easily light on fire, keep it away from your house. And if you're going to have plants near your house, you should be irrigating them correctly so that they aren't drying out and producing, tinder or something that could easily catch on fire. And that's all so far. Those were all suggestions about how you can um, deal with the impacts. But something else that we can do is reduce our impact in the first place. And that means sequestering carbon into your garden. And you can start right now. You've probably got plants that are doing it already. Um, so you want to maximize the amount of living roots to maximize carbon being stored in the soil. And that just means more plants. So next time you go out and you see a plant that you like and you say, oh, I don't know, should I get that plant? Maybe it's kind of expensive, or maybe you have a spouse who says, no more plants, no more plants. You can say, but I'm just doing my part to sequester carbon into the soil. Um, so the more plants you have, the more roots you have in the soil. They're taking carbon and building the plant itself. The plant is made of carbon, and um, plants with deeper roots, like trees, they can store carbon in the soil for up to 1,000 years. Um, the regular carbon storage for like an herbaceous perennial is more like 1 to 50 years. So go for trees, plant trees. Okay, and then just a quick list of like what else can you do? Um, Avoid using peat moss. I don't know how many of you know about peat moss. It's a common component in potting soils. If you go out to a garden center and you buy a bag of soil, there's very likely peat moss in there. And it's used because it's basically inert and it holds moisture and it gives potting soils an airy structure. But that peat moss had to be dug out of a bog. And there's more carbon, I'm going to try and get this right. There's more carbon stored in bogs around the world than in all of the forests of the world. So we talk about forests a lot as, like the Amazon is, the lungs of the world, the lungs of the planet. People say that sometimes, but perhaps the bogs are, you know, they should also be mentioned because they're playing a very big, important role in our uh, the contents of our atmosphere. Um, Avoid using new plastics. I don't know about everyone on the call, but I have like stacks of old black plastic containers from garden centers and when I buy plants. And I'm always trying to reuse them to put new plants in there. If I'm going to propagate something, I'll use that. And basically, plastics are an energy intensive product to produce. So it's going back to carbon footprint, trying to reduce your carbon footprint. Um, Use well-made compost instead of synthetic fertilizers. Synthetic fertilizers are like plastics. They're a petroleum-based product, and we want to reduce our carbon footprint and reduce the energy that we need to do these common gardening tasks. So um, using compost in a garden bed is much better than going out buying a synthetic fertilizer that was shipped somewhere. And if you follow that ratio of 3 to 1, you can have great compost right at your own house. Learn to save seeds. You can select for the most resilient varieties that are growing in your garden already. Um, this is kind of a good way to know what's going to work. If a plant is doing very well on your property already and you collect seeds and um, sow them to have new plants for the next year, it's like a plant that your property selected for itself, something that's going to do well, that can be resilient, that'll like your soils, and it's much cheaper than going out to buy a plant in a pot. And then finally, replace gas-powered tools with electric. This is purely carbon footprint. If you're, not using gas-powered tools and you're electric, maybe you have solar panels on your roof. Um, you're doing a pretty good job of reducing your carbon footprint. Okay. And I've been talking a lot about resiliency for you and for us, but it's also for wildlife. I just need to add this in here really quickly that um, by having a resilient garden, you're also providing habitat for wildlife. And as open space, which is like natural space, reserve, preserve lands, um, as those spaces get more stressed by climate change, there's often not someone there trying to make the best decision. And how can that space resist climate change, be resilient against climate change? And we might start to lose some species. So, like I was saying about the hemlocks, I was able to work and manage the forest with the hemlocks, but there are vast stretches of land that are not managed, and we are going to start to lose those species. So if you in your garden can make decisions that will support your gardening, your enjoyment of your property, and also support wildlife, as birds and insects and everyone else deals with climate change, I think that that's a really great thing. So, what is a resilient garden? Just to finish up here, it's definitely a flexible garden and it requires a resilient gardener. So, if anyone on the call is a long-term gardener, then you know what it means to be a resilient gardener because I think every gardener is inherently needs to be resilient um, because you never know. Plants are plants. They're going to do what they want. They're going to thrive. They're going to not thrive. You put something in the ground that you think is going to do great, and it's just not going to enjoy that spot, and it's going to die. Um, and you just find something else to fill in that spot, and you just keep going. And that's what we need to do as we start, embracing this climate changed planet. Um, Designed and planted in ways that protect from extreme weather. So everything that I was just talking about, um, species chosen for resiliency to variable weather, do a little bit of research on a plant before you put it in your garden. See, um, are you at the very extreme of its historic range, or are you in the middle of its historic range? Has it been shown to be moving? Maybe it's a plant that came from further south and your nursery is just picking it up this year because they're realizing that actually it would be okay. Um, be prepared to replant. You can propagate and expect some loss year to year. That's part of being flexible and resilient. If you know how to propagate plants, you can, take cuttings. Like I said, you can collect seeds, and just expect that, your plants, your garden might look different every year. Um, Increase carbon held in your soil by planting deep-rooted perennials and trees, like I was talking about. And think about the long term. There's a great saying that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is today. Um, think about the long term. You have to expect that your garden's going to change. If you put a tree in today, 20 years from now, what's it going to look like? How's it going to be interacting with the other plants around it? Um, yeah. I think that that's it. I put a little thank you with my email and the Perfect Earth Project website. Um, if anyone wants to send me an email anytime, please feel free to do so. Um, and yeah, that's my little presentation. So I would love to hear from everyone else who's on the call. I don't know how many people are on the call. I'm gonna stop sharing. Um, we've got 21 people on the call, so lots of people to hear from. I would love to hear how climate change has impacted you guys. Has anybody had to deal with anything?
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Nancy?
Yeah, hi. One thing I've noticed, and I know you're not an entomologist, but this seems to be a kind of climate change thing, is that we have a lot of milkweed and we bought some and it self-propagated a lot. So that's great. And it flowered, has a lovely smell. But now it's kind of in the seed making stage. And finally, we saw monarchs showing up in our yard. So it's like, hey, wait a minute, weren't you supposed to be attracted to the flowers? So it seems to be a timing thing, but I don't know. Just an observation.
Yeah, I've been hearing a lot from people that they haven't seen many monarchs this year. So, yeah, not many monarchs, but a lot of fireflies. Those are the two.
Yeah. Yes, yes. And leaving the leaves is great for fireflies. And speaking of wildlife, it's also great for, we have a couple box turtles, and it's really fun when they finally do show up and then they burrow under some leaves to get away from you.
Mhm. Yeah. Anyone else?
Yeah, Tim, I have a question. I was
Yeah.
just at a forum this weekend, and someone raised the question of assisted migration. That is
Mhm.
because of climate change. The question, we were talking about planting native plants, and this person asked a question, or actually made a statement saying that, well, what is native with climate change? We're seeing more and more southern, plants that would once would have thrived south of us are now going to thrive here.
Mhm.
So for me, my question is, do we need to assist in this migration, or is this something that will happen over time, through evolution and so on? Are there any, do you have any thoughts about the up and downside of this so-called assisted migration?
Yeah. It kind of feels like an existential question about, like time frames, and a lot of my work focuses on invasive plants. I've done a lot of invasive plant management, and that's kind of similar in the sense that, given a long enough time period, nature is going to work itself out. The plants are going to work themselves out. Um, but in the immediate, do we want to put time and energy into protecting locally native plants and native plant communities? And yeah, I think assisted migration is a good thing because it can give us plants that are going to do well um, in a certain area. Like if we don't have other options, something that's you know, locally native, then could be okay. I personally am a bit more of a purist, I think, and would say, try to help the plants that are there already. We want to protect, these are like really big conversations about genetic diversity and all this stuff. But we want to try and protect genetic diversity, and the assisted migration, if it's coming through the nursery trade, often those plants are just clones of each other. And, if we're gonna like bring, I don't know, some herbaceous perennial or a shrub or something from the south, and it's just going to be a copy of one individual that goes into all these gardens, it's not so interesting, I think, to me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Susan, you had a question before?
It was really more an observation. I'm noticing that while lobelia obviously is prolific, at spreading its seeds and so on and so forth, it just seems that, like even in the last 2 years, that there's just so many more that come to fruition, and I just feel like it's the warming of Long Island.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and the other thing is that just, I've only been here for 18 months, and last year to this year are shaping up to be quite different years climatically. Like last year we had all this drought in the end of the summer and into the fall, and this year so far we've had a good amount of rain. And yeah, I'm not surprised that you're seeing more and more, and I wouldn't be surprised if that changes and goes back in some way, that as we have different types of weather events and years look different from each other, different plants are going to do better than others. That's part of, that's why it's so hard, I think, to actually be resilient in a garden. Like, how do you plan for the unknown? It's pretty tough. So what I said during the presentation about having diversity in your plant selection is a way to insulate yourself a bit so that some plants are allowed to spread and, do as you were saying. And, other plants, if they can't make it, or if they can't spread one year, but they survive in a corner by themselves, they'll be there for next year when the conditions change, and, then their seeds are the ones that are favored, or whatever it is.
Thank you.
I think Francesca had a question earlier on about what do you mean by avoiding soil disturbance in terms of planting new plants and building a new native beds? How do you do that without disturbing the soil?
Yeah. So if you're going to put a plant in the ground, it's hard to not disturb the soil if you have to get a plant in the ground. But just trying like minimally not to disturb the soil, so you can seed things if it's a plant that can easily be seeded. You can seed instead of putting a 5-gallon giant root ball in the ground. And I think it might be more common. I mean, soil disturbance alone is more common in agriculture. They're constantly disturbing their soils, digging and tilling and, whatever they do. But in a garden, you can just be conscious of the fact that your soil is a living thing. It might actually be the most important living thing on your property. And you want to protect that kind of at all costs. And, if you're gonna, I don't know, put in a new irrigation line and it requires a bunch of digging or something, they're gonna have to replace a sewer pipe coming off your house, and they're gonna do this whole big digging project in your front yard. That's gonna have an impact on something that's really important on your property. I think there were some questions here. A question came in.
Yes. It feels like there are more pests since the weather isn't as cold in the winter. So more voles, Asian jumping worms, and things are usually, like you said, like the woolies that should have died off.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also plants. It's not just insects and disease. There are some plants that historically wouldn't have survived here that I think are more and more creeping up from the south as they don't experience hard frosts that would kill them. So yeah, it's a big problem. Yeah. And increased humidity, like more rain can cause fungal problems. If you have plants that are experiencing drought, they're going to be stressed. And the more stressed a plant is, the more susceptible it is to pests and disease. So, yeah, if a plant is really stressed and there's a pest there that was always there, but you didn't notice it because it could never really get a foothold, all of a sudden you have a plant that's like freaking out, and this pest comes along and says, "Oh, look at this plant that's freaking out. That's perfect for me to have a snack and start an infestation." Then all of a sudden, oh my gosh, what are we doing? How do I help this plant? Yeah. Let's see, reading these comments here. So many dragonflies, but I'm really having issues with mosquitoes, so much so that I cannot at this point in season be in my yard despite trying mosquito buckets. Mosquito buckets. Do we mean a bucket like a la Homegrown National Park, a bucket that you kind of decorated and you purposefully fill it with water and you put dunks in it? Yeah. We had a big conversation about that. That came into our emails about a month or so ago, and we had a big conversation about humans are complicated creatures that can forget things and, don't get their timing right on the dunks, or they leave like their bucket, they go on vacation, they leave their bucket. And so Suffolk County Vector Control was not so sure about the buckets, saying that they might actually be making it worse for some people. And then Doug Tallamy chimed in and said, we had vector control on one side who's saying that they're trying to protect humans from insects. And then Doug Tallamy said, but I think that it's worth it because then people don't spray. So then we had Doug trying to protect insects from humans on the other side. This is the conversation that we're having, trying to, balance insects and humans and whose attention who gets the attention. Yeah, mosquitoes. It could be this year, it could be because we've had so much rain, and there could be things that are collecting water that you're not seeing. They're collecting water. That's probably what I would guess. Yeah. But, the dunks work. If you put mosquito dunks in where the water is, that definitely works. Or you can just, dump the water out, let it go into the soil. How do I amend the soil with compost and manure and honor the no dig rule? Don't dig it in. You just put it on top. All the life in your soil is going to work it right back in. And yeah, that's it's been going on for millions of years. The leaves fall in the forest, cover the old leaves that are decomposing, and insects and all kinds of stuff are breaking down the leaves, and the organic matter goes down into the soil, and that's how we create these layers of organic matter and humus. And yeah, so you don't need to dig it in. Spraying for pest control is bad for humus too. Yes. Yeah, even the so-called organic sprays. Yeah, absolutely. Organic sprays are not specific to any type of insect. They're not specific to mosquitoes. They're not specific to ticks. And they will kill fireflies. They'll kill the caterpillars, the butterflies, any insect that they come in contact with. So yeah, the best thing for especially ticks, if anyone's interested, the best thing is to spray yourself and check yourself, because a human body is a manageable amount of real estate, and your, quarter acre, half acre, acre and a half, whatever you got, it's a much larger amount of real estate to manage. So spray yourself and check yourself. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I do notice one thing with the mosquito buckets, and I've been doing this now. This is my third year doing it.
Okay.
I do have noticeably less mosquito this year.
Okay.
But I do this year, for the first time, I cut back my Joe Pye weed and found out that the stems are hollow. So then I am creating a mosquito breeding ground now with my Joe Pye. So I put a lot more buckets and I put a lot more dunks around the area in hope that they would be attracted to the buckets instead of my hollow Joe Pye.
Yeah.
But Next year, I am not gonna cut my Joe pie back.
Yeah.
But if you have bamboo sticks, just, make sure that they're not cracked and holding water too.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
How about drought? How did people deal with the drought last summer and fall on Long Island? Did anybody lose some plants? Did you have to do a bunch of extra irrigating? Yeah, I'm getting a nod from Francesca.
You want to say something?
Yeah, if no one else has anything to say. Unfortunately, we were away for the whole month of October. And the backstory behind this is that we had a woodland in the back of our yard that was being overrun by ostrich ferns. And I thought I'd have to go in and weed them out or, cut them back and thin them out because I didn't want them to become a monoculture. And this spring, for the first time in all the time we've had those back there, instead of coming back to find them growing more and more, nature had done the cutting back for me. Now, I don't know whether it was because of the drought and we were away the whole month of October and couldn't water anything, but we had that's just a phenomenon. I don't know whether it's simply association or causality, but an interesting story, I think.
Mhm. Yeah, I think the impacts of drought are longer lasting than most people think. I was getting emails contacted by people in the spring saying, "Oh my gosh, all of a sudden, X, Y, or Z plant is brown and dead. What happened?" And I would say, "Were you watering them during that drought that we had?" They said, "Well, a bit." And I said, "I think you probably needed to do more than a bit." And, the impact wasn't noticed until, like 6 months later or something. Um, so I don't know if anyone goes up to Connecticut, but I grew up in central Connecticut and my parents still live there. And they have a bunch of rhododendrons that by the time like March or April of this year rolled around, they totally browned out, totally random because it was so much later after the fall, but it was eventually connected back to the drought that we experienced in the fall. Um, yeah.
I did lose a plant last year and I did not realize that it was not getting hit by the sprinkler. That's essentially, and so I wasn't watering it. It was the devil's needle, the clematis, the native clematis, which needed a
Mhm.
lot of water.
Mm.
So that happened. But also I mentioned also the dragonflies. Have you seen, like I was across the street, there's a field, a school, there was a swarm of them, like yes, the other day. So many, which is
Yeah.
wonderful. And I'm like, come and eat my mosquitoes, please.
Yeah.
But have you seen that? Sorry, I have people talking. Have you seen that correlation of an increase in an abundance of dragonflies? Have other people seen that? I've seen so many, more than I usually do, and fireflies.
I haven't personally seen a lot, but I haven't really lived in the area long enough to know what a lot is, I think, for Long Island. Um, we've had a pretty steady amount of rain, I think, and I wouldn't be surprised if that has led to more habitat for dragonflies. There's a type of wetland called a vernal pool. I don't know if everyone on the call knows what a vernal pool is, but it's an ephemeral water body, basically, that the precipitation from the winter collects in an area that has the correct kind of wetland soils, and the water stays there. And then at some point in the summer, they dry out. And these are historically like the best place for reproduction for lots of different kinds of animals because the fact that they dry out means that there are no fish, which are the biggest predators of, insects or frog eggs or whatever. And because we've kind of had a steady amount of rain, I wouldn't be surprised if the vernal pools that we have stayed wet for longer than normal, and maybe that's allowed for more, um, larger populations of things like dragonflies this year. It's just a thought, but
And just to throw it out there, if anybody's interested in building a vernal pool, it is very doable because it doesn't have to be very deep. It needs to be shallow.
Yeah.
So if you excavate the lawn and just move that lawn to the side to create an edge, you have your vernal pool. Just line it, 12 inches. Dig 6 inches and all that goes to the side and you got 12 inches. It's very doable.
My mosquito problem is so bad that last year, because around this time it starts to really build up, I actually considered, like, I was so desperate that I said I'm going to create a habitat for dragonflies and maybe they will take care of the problem. I had Spadefoot Design here and she spoke about, and I didn't quite understand it, but she said the spraying that people do, and at one point I did do organic spray because I thought it was fine, but I learned it wasn't, and I stopped many years ago. But she said something about the spraying creates an effect where you increase your mosquito population. So I don't know if you could speak to that. I sort of understood what she was saying, but I didn't. So with all the people who spray, you might be killing them, but it just creates a situation for them to really be a greater population than originally.
Yeah, so I like to say that you don't have a pest problem, you have a predator problem. And, the cycle of life is that there's something always trying to eat the thing that's smaller. So, this is part of the problem with these non-specific, even organic sprays, is that they're going to kill everything. And you're basically just hitting the reset button on the clock so that the things that would eat your pests are also getting knocked back, except that pests tend to reproduce faster. That's why they're pests and they kind of have this infestation. And yeah, so, instead of like, um, I don't know, trying to put out rodenticides and kill moles and voles, we say, no, you should try and get foxes and snakes and, predatory birds onto your property. Um, and try to kind of like rebalance, find equilibrium again between the predators and the pests. And yeah. Any other questions from anybody?
I thought I saw a question way up at the beginning of the chat about hemlock trees, but maybe I'll go back and see if I could find that, or Zong can look.
Yes, so I actually have hemlocks in my property. They are ginormous, like ginormous. They do have woolies. And I start seeing seedlings from them and so I've been trying to just put all the seed cones in one place to see if they can sprout. So I have a few seedlings going. The seedling have not get woolies yet. So I don't know how long it takes for the woolly to find it. It's already on the adult tree.
Yeah.
So if you have insight on, what I could be doing, some folks suggest smoking them, like put a bonfire under the tree and, hopefully the smoke would probably knock back the woolies a bit. So have you thought about that? Any studies?
I haven't heard about smoking them out, though hemlocks tend to be pretty good tinder. So that sounds a little dangerous. Um, uh, it's a big conversation. Should we save things should we put all this energy and all these resources into saving things that are going to die, even though it's our fault that they're going to die? Or should we just try to like hold out for a little while until something better comes along for managing? And I'm not really sure what the best answer is, but the research that I know about that is kind of hopeful is from Cornell. And 3 or 4 years ago, they were trialing a biological control of the adelgid. And I don't remember if it was, I think it was a wasp. We have many, many wasps, small parasitic wasps that lay eggs in insects and all kinds of things. And so they were trialing these releases of a wasp that I believe would kill the adelgid. Yeah, I think that's what it was. And that's been going on now for a while, so I would think that at some point they might bring that to the market, and you could be doing releases. It's kind of, do you want to be stuck buying a product, even if it's a live animal, a product every year to keep your hemlocks? It's a conversation.
There's a question about bed boxes. Do they work to reduce mosquito population?
I have no idea. It's a good question. Maybe someone else on the chat knows. Nancy says no. She doesn't know.
I don't see there's no bats around me. Like I tried looking for them, there's none. So if I do put up a bat box, what's the chance of a bat finding it when there's nobody flying around looking for a bat box? So dragonflies is a more manageable creature to attract.
Yeah.
In my case.
Well, when I was a child growing up, not too far away from you, Zong, we'd go out in the evening and watch the bats diving for mosquitoes. They were so numerous.
Well, then let's start a project and bring back the bats because I don't see any. There's no more frogs. I hear them, I don't see them. I do now have tadpoles because I have a vernal pool. So I'm trying, but no bats yet. So let's try to bring back the bats.
I would be really interested to know if you did put out a bat box, would you get bats? Because maybe they're there and, if you build it, they will come. Maybe they'll show up. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how far they travel, how they would find it if they're really far away. Yeah.
I would consider that a challenge accepted. I'll go and get myself a bat box and I'll let Glenn know how long it takes for me to get a bat. Anybody else have a question? Please unmute yourself. Thank you, Tim, for a wonderful discussion and a wonderful presentation.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you again. Everybody's saying thank you. And we hope to see you next week on our webinar and next month on another speakers workshop. And keep in touch with our newsletter. And if you have any questions, just email us. We answer all of the questions we receive. Thank you, Tim, again. It was great.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.